Hello and welcome to this week's Disasters in History, where we talk about disasters that happen in history during this week. This week says September 8th to September 14th. So to get started here, our first disaster this week was on September 8th, 1900 with the Galveston Hurricane. On September 8th, 1900, the deadliest disaster in American history came ashore near Galveston, Texas. The hurricane, a Category 4 on the Saffir-Simpson scale with 145 mile per hour sustained winds and a central pressure of 932 millibars, caught Galveston almost completely unaware. At the time, the United States Weather Bureau discouraged local meteorologists from using words such as hurricane and tornado because they were afraid of panicking those in the path of the storm, and there was a belief that local meteorologists were overwarning those in their areas. Because of all this, all storm warnings had to come from Washington, D.C., not local meteorologists, specifically the U.S. Weather Bureau office in Washington, D.C. Literally no one else in the United States, no matter where they were, no matter what time it was, could issue storm warnings aside from the D.C. office of the U.S. Weather Bureau. This meant that even if a local meteorologist could tell that a storm was coming, they could not warn their local area for fear of reprimand or being fired. At the same time, Cuba, the country of Cuba, had created what was basically the best hurricane tracking system in the world. It was run by local Jesuit priests there, had spent years upon years developing a way to track hurricanes by the way the clouds looked, as well as a large network of essentially storm spotters across the Caribbean. But the head of the Weather Bureau in D.C. decided that the Cuban forecasting system was simply hysterics and not at all accurate, despite them being ridiculously accurate and also 100% correct about the Galveston hurricane, and decided to simply cut them off from warning anyone. So part of this was because the U.S. Weather Bureau wanted to be the one in charge of all storm warnings, but also part of it was because the Spanish-American War and the Cuban portion of that had just ended. So there was still some hostility there, and the U.S. was still essentially occupying Cuba. So they sent down several people to basically shut down Cuba's hurricane warning system. They also reached out to the U.S. War Department and had them bump Cuban weather telegraphs to the mainland to the lowest priority. The head of the Bureau also contacted Western Union and asked them to think of their patriotic duty and ignore weather telegrams from Cuba, which they did. Now, it's still unclear whether they actually ignored them or they straight up didn't send them whatsoever, but the gist of it is that they didn't get to anyone on the mainland whatsoever, regardless of what storms were coming. The problem with this is Cuba was being hit by the beginning of the Galveston hurricane, and they predicted that it would continue west-northwest after crossing Cuba, which they were right. The U.S. Weather Bureau did not believe this was physically possible. They believed that all storms would recurve back out towards the Atlantic Ocean, and this one would be no different, meaning the storm would travel over Florida. Literally, the U.S. Weather Bureau believed that no hurricane could go towards the Galveston area, that they would all recurve back around and go back towards the Atlantic Ocean. They did not believe it was possible for Texas to be hit by a hurricane. In fact, the U.S. Weather Bureau was so confident that the storm had no chance of hitting Galveston or Texas whatsoever that they issued warnings that for all areas east of New Orleans all the way to North Carolina on September 6th, basically stating that there would be rough seas, but not actually putting out, the word hurricane, because that was not allowed. On the morning of September 6th, it was heavily raining in the Florida Keys, and the U.S. Weather Bureau patted themselves on the back that they were right. Except the storm never moved into central Florida like they thought. The Cuban forecasters were right. The storm was heading towards Galveston and Texas. So on September 7th and September 8th, they began to issue warnings up and down the Texas coast that there would be rough seas. Again, not ever saying the word hurricane. In fact, the local forecaster for Galveston refused to say the word hurricane to anyone up until essentially the very last moment. The hurricane itself arrived in the early morning hours of September 8th with a 15-foot storm surge. The highest point on Galveston Island at that time was only about 9 feet above sea level. The entire town of Galveston was devastated by the storm. In fact, the entire island of Galveston Island was devastated by the storm. There was not a single portion of the entire island that escaped any of the storm surge. One of the only still seaworthy boats on the island managed to get out and relay a message to the governor in Washington, D.C., saying the entire city of Galveston was gone and at least 500 people were killed. Initially, this was believed to be an exaggeration. It was instead a severely low estimate. In total, somewhere between 4,000 to 8,000 people died in Galveston alone. In the days after the storm passed, rescue workers could hear the screams of people trapped below the debris, but could not get to many of them before they died. In total, the Galveston hurricane devastated a large portion of the coast of Texas and ended up killing anywhere from 6,000 to 12,000 people. It led to major changes in hurricane forecasting and disaster response, and additionally, the city of Galveston raised major portions of the city 17 feet higher and built a seawall that stretches 10 miles to protect the city from future hurricanes. Now, there have been more hurricanes that have hit Galveston and have caused some damage, even some overtopping the seawall, but for the most part, it has not been nearly as devastating as the hurricane in 1900. The storm also brought an end to much of the industry in Galveston, with the majority of investors pulling out and moving to Houston instead. Now, one of the things I wanted to show you guys was the actual seawall that was built in the aftermath of the 1900 hurricane. So, if we zoom out here, let me turn that off real quick. This whole area right here is Galveston Island, and Galveston itself is on the north end of the island. And if you zoom in here, you can see where it says Seawall Boulevard right here along the coast, because that is where the seawall is. If we zoom in here and we pick one of these dots here on the coast, you can see, it's blurry, but it's there. You can see the seawall that was built back in 1900. It still exists. It still does its job, and it keeps water out of the city. You can see back here on the wall, it's kind of curved up to help with preventing water. It's an interesting sight. If you ever end up down near Houston, it's absolutely worth a drive out to Galveston just to see the seawall and understand, what happened that day back in 1900. It's one of those really interesting things to stand here and think about. Literally everything around you was completely covered in seawater. The whole island itself. It's very interesting to go look at. Our next disaster this week is the Italian Grand Prix disaster at the Monza circuit near Monza, Italy, otherwise known as the Temple of Speed. On September 10th, 1961, the Italian Grand Prix was underway. They had completed one full lap of the race and were getting ready to finish the second, heading into the final steep banked curve of the Parabolica. Basically, it's a giant oval inside the actual road course of the track. One driver, Wolfgang von Trips, was by far the odds-on favorite to win the race in his red Ferrari. Just behind him as they were heading into the final turn was Jim Clark in a Lotus. Clark's car was lighter than Von Tripp's Ferrari, so he didn't have to slow down as quickly as Von Trips did to take the high-banked final turn at the right speed. In an attempt to make up ground, Clark began to pass Von Trips on the outside and had nosed his front tires even with Von Tripp's rear tires. Von Trips apparently never saw him and slowly drifted to his left to set up the proper racing line when his left rear tire and Clark's right front tire collided. This twisted Von Trips' car to the left and hit the grass, which caused his Ferrari to roll, throwing Von Trips, who was not wearing a seatbelt, from the vehicle and killing him. His car, still traveling at full speed, shot up the grass embankment, hit the chain link fence that was protecting spectators, and completely shredded the fence. 15 spectators were killed, with several more injured, making it the deadliest incident in F1 history. Now, in order to make this a little bit easier, we're going to go look at it on Google Maps to show you guys exactly how this particular disaster occurred. So here we have the overall autodrome, the Monza track. So if we look here on our track, here-ish is the start-finish line, right where my red line is. And in order to take the race, you go up this way, turn to the right, come down this way, turn right again, come back down through here. You go across here, you take this hairpin turn, go around, and then this is a high banked curve right here. You go around here, come down this straightaway, you go through this high banked curve here and back to the start finish line. Our accident occurred right around in this area. So if you look here, they're coming along right here as they come into this high banked curve, right? So if we go onto the actual track here, as we can, thanks to the handy dandy street view. So they're racing down, coming into this curve. You can see down at the end, see how it's banked right there? So they're coming down into this curve. We'll use red for Von Tripp's car. So we're going to say Von Tripp's car is right here, right? And we're going to use blue for Clark's car. Clark's car is right here. So they're racing down the track. Von Tripp's is in front. His car weighs significantly more than the Lotus. So in order to slow down enough so that he's not taking that curve at a very high rate of speed, he turns on the brakes sooner than Clark does in his Lotus with a lesser car, because the heavier car, the longer it's going to take to slow down. So he backs off just a little bit. Clark, realizing that he can make up some ground and maybe pass Von Tripp's before he makes it to the curve, moves his car, starts to pass him on the outside here. These are open wheel cars, by the way. So when he gets up, he gets just even right here with the back of his tire. In order to properly take this turn, Von Tripp's needs to shift his car this direction so he can hit this bankment right, so that he's going through the racing line to take the shortest and the fastest route through that embankment. So he starts drifting his car this way. Unfortunately, he never saw the car back here coming to his, that was on his left. So his back tire here collides with Clark's front tire here. This sends his car spinning this direction. And you can see, let me erase these cars boxes. You can see here on the right, the left, this is literally, like, this is not changed. This is exactly what it looked like in 1961. It was a chain link fence on top of, there's been some trees here now, but on top of a grass embankment. So he hits, his car goes up this embankment, flips over. Von Tripp's gets launched out of his car and ends up further down the track, dead instantly. His car goes up into the chain link fence, rips it apart, kills 15 spectators, and then lands back on the track. Now, you have a car that is not working, that is just sitting in the middle of the track. You have a dead body that's sitting in the middle of the track. And then you have Clark's car that is somewhere over here that has Clark sitting in it, dazed and confused. Meanwhile, all of the drivers behind them, because they were in the front of the pack, are still racing by at essentially full speed. Now, some of them slowed down in order to make it through without crashing, and one of the people that drove by was one of Von Tripp's very good friends, and he realized whose car it was, and then when he realized whose car it was and there was no one in it, and then saw the dead body laying on the pavement, he sat there and stared as he drove by and nearly crashed into another car, realizing his friend was dead on the pavement. Now, the race was not stopped. They did not stop the race in order to clean this up. They just moved the cars and Von Tripp's body off to the side to deal with it, because they were afraid that if they stopped the race, that ambulances and whatnot would not be able to get to the spectators that were injured and needed it over here, because everyone would attempt to leave the track at the same time. It's the same thing that happened in the 1955 Le Mans disaster. They were afraid that they would clog up the roads so ambulance couldn't get there to save people that could still be saved. Now, this section of the track is more or less closed. That was the last time they raced on the Parabolica. So that is the 1961 Italian Grand Prix disaster. Our next disaster is the 9th Avenue derailment. On September 11th, 1905, the 9th Avenue train was following along a 6th Avenue train. The two trains shared a line in the area, but the 6th Avenue train would take a sharp curve following its route, while the 9th Avenue train would continue straight. The Ninth Avenue train was mistakenly put on the curve, traveling at 30 miles per hour when the max speed on the curve was 9 miles per hour. The motorman attempted to slam on the brakes, but the second car derailed off the tracks and fell off the elevated rail, ripping the roof off and causing a fire. Some people inside the second car were crushed by falling debris from the third car. The derailment and fire caused 13 total deaths. Now, in the aftermath of this disaster, 2 people were arrested. The signal person and the motorman were arrested for basically causing this disaster. The motorman maintained that the signalman had been trying to get him fired and sent him down 6th Avenue's rail several times prior. It was just this time he was trying to make up lost time and didn't pay attention to where he was and was well above the speed limit for the curve. They still arrested him after he was eventually found and held in jail for 2 years before he eventually escaped from prison, ended up traveling with a person that he escaped from prison from, and then when the person he escaped from prison from got sick, he basically sat with him and got arrested again and spent the rest of the time in jail. Our next disaster was also September 11th. It was September 11th, 2012, the Pakistan garment factory fires. On September 11th, 2012, 2 separate factory fires in Pakistan caused massive death tolls for wildly different reasons. The first fire happened at the Karachi garment factory in southern Pakistan. The original origin of this fire is mired in controversy. It turns out a local political group known as MQM had been attempting to extort 200 million rupees from the owners of the factory. When they did not pay, they set the factory on fire. Unfortunately, all the doors for the factory were locked and all the windows had bars across them, so the 300 to 400 workers inside were trapped. Adding to the terrible situation, it took the fire department a full 75 minutes to arrive on scene. By that point, there was no saving anyone who was still trapped inside, and 289 people were killed in the fire in the building that had allegedly just been inspected and certified for safety just weeks prior to the blaze. So, prior to this, an international group had come in and inspected the Karachi garment factory and approved it for safety, saying it was a top-of-the-line factory. The problem was they didn't actually come in and do the inspection. They hired a group in Pakistan to do the inspection. That group in Pakistan never actually went to the factory to check to see if anything was up to standard and just certified it regardless. All of the locked doors and all of the bars on the window had nothing to do with the fact that a local government group set it on fire. That was already a thing that happened. They just set it on fire to send a message. All of the things that led up to the actual garment factory burning and killing all those people trapped inside were things that were already happening prior to the fire being set. So, it was in fact an arson. Had it not been an arson and been an accidental fire, it still probably would have killed at least 289 people, if not more. Some people managed to kick out some doors and get out, but basically it was a death trap regardless of how the fire was started. And that's one of the things that I'm going to get on a rant here for a second. That was one of the things that I really like to harp on with fires, is that even if a fire is intentionally set, there are still fire safety things that should be in effect that will not make those arsons nearly as bad as they could be. Now, there are some things that you can do as an arsonist to make fires bad, but in this case, it didn't matter that it was an arson at all, period. Regardless of how the fire started, it would have been a nightmare. If Coconut Grove had been an arson, wouldn't have mattered. Still would have been a nightmare. These are the things that really have to point out when talking about fires. Anyway, that's a whole different rant. Back on topic. The other fire, the same day, September 11th, 2012, also in Pakistan, was at a shoe factory in Lahore in northern Pakistan. This fire started when a faulty generator kicked sparks into a pile of flammable material. Unfortunately, this generator was located at the only exit from the building, trapping people inside. 25 people were killed inside this building because, again, doesn't matter how the fire started. If you have no exits, people are going to die. Our last disaster is the Chatsworth train disaster near Los Angeles, California on September 12th, 2008. A Metrolink commuter train consisting of one locomotive and 3 bi-level coaches left the Chatsworth train station heading westbound with 222 people aboard at about 40 miles per hour. At the same time, a Union Pacific freight train with 2 locomotives and 17 freight cars was traveling the exact opposite direction down the same line at about 40 miles per hour. This is going to sound like a math problem. It is not. What was supposed to happen is the Metrolink train was to wait at a red stop signal for the Union Pacific train to pass on the double track before proceeding onto the single track that went around the curve and through a tunnel. Unfortunately, the engineer for the Metrolink train was texting while driving and did not see the red stop signal and went right past it. 5 minutes later, 22 seconds after the engineer sent his last text message to a 16-year-old rail fan, the 2 trains collided head-on. The freight train attempted to put on the emergency brakes just before the collision. The Metrolink train never activated the brakes, indicating the engineer never saw the freight train coming. The force of the collision sent the Metrolink locomotive backwards into the first of the passenger car, derailed, and caught on fire. The collision instantly killed the engineer. The engineer and conductor of the freight train were trapped inside the locomotive but were rescued by firefighters who intervened without having put on SCBAs because they could see the engineer and conductor beating on the glass on the inside of the locomotive as smoke was rapidly filling it. In total, 25 people were killed and 135 were injured. Now, if you look at this photo here on my left, my left, you can see here is the locomotive right here. It is pushed all the way back. This is the car that had the passengers in it. That is, it has been shoved all the way back inside it, which killed several people that were sitting in the front of this train car back here. Now, to give you an idea of exactly what happened here, we're going to look at our handy dandy map. Here we have the train station. This is the Chatsworth station right here. We zoom in here. Let me erase this. We zoom in here. You can see there are double tracks. There is this track here and this track here. So, the Metrolink train pulled up on this track going this direction. The Union Pacific train was supposed to come down this track here going that direction. Now, if we zoom out here, we go a little bit up this direction. You can see it's double track all the way up to here. Here is where it becomes single track. You can see right here is where it goes to single track. The Metrolink train was supposed to stop somewhere in this general area and wait for the Union Pacific train to come through this tunnel. You can see right here. All the way around. Still single track. All the way around. So the Union Pacific train is traveling this direction, goes through this tunnel, comes down around this curve, and then when it gets here, it goes over to this side, and then the Metrolink train comes on this direction. Instead of stopping, the Metrolink train just continued going as the Union Pacific train was coming out of the tunnel. They collided right about here, give or take. So they just barely, a minute maybe, before, because let's see, let me zoom in here. Okay. So your lane switch is right there where it goes from one track to 2 tracks. Your collision is right here in this curve. That is, let's see, can we measure this? Measure distance from here to here, 1,500 feet. That's actually a little bit more because of the curve, but here, it's a little over 1,500 feet. That is at 40 miles per hour, not very much time. And so, because of that, they banned all texting for people driving trains at the time. They also later passed a bill to ban texting while driving in California. This crash was one of the driving factors for that, along with a bunch of other stuff. But that is one of the big things that led to the changes of texting while operating heavy machinery. Now, there was also another texting-related disaster for trains that happened in, I believe, England that caused a very similar problem. But this is one of the strangest disasters I've ever heard of, because you don't really think of it being a problem of texting while operating a train. But he did send about 5 text messages in the time it took him to miss the red signal and then collide with the actual train itself. So that's the end of this week's disasters in history. I hope you guys enjoyed it. As always, you can like, share, subscribe, comment. Let me know what you think, what you want to see in the future. That's pretty much it. As always, stay safe and remember to check your smoke detector batteries. Man, I'm really bad at endings.